What's up, guys? Welcome back to FishOfHex. My name is Travis. In today's video, we're going to be working on the new 40-gallon rimless shallow reef. Now, this is an extension of my 300-gallon, and if you didn't see the previous videos in this series, definitely check out the playlist in the description below. Now, when it comes to today's video, we're going to be focusing on the lighting, more specifically the type of lighting, the overall intensity, schedule, and par numbers on the rock structures. Now, on top of that, we will be adding coral from our main display tank, as well as adding some of these colonies that we removed previously from that tank due to shading. So, with all that said, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so let's go ahead and first talk about the type of lighting. Now, as you can see, we have 4 of these Aqua Illumination Prime HD LEDs. Now, I'm a big fan of this light because they're so similar to the Radion XR15s, and you guys know that I run 8 of those over my 300-gallon, and I've had a ton of success with them. So, being that it's a smaller light, about half the price, if not less than that, you can definitely get away with a great spread, spectrum, and overall par intensity for your smaller tanks like these shallow reefs and cubes and such things like that. Now, would I personally use a light like this over my 300-gallon? Absolutely not. It's just way too deep, being about 31 inches, that this light just won't have the power to really get to the bottom of the glass like those XR15s do. All right, so real quick, over here at Bulk Reef Supply, you guys can see that the light does go for about $210 each. And if you factor in the mount, you're looking at about $245, $250 shipped per light. Now, for some of you who are just getting into the hobby, you might feel that that is quite a bit of money. But once you start looking at like higher end Kessels, like the AP700s and the XR30s and shit like that, you'll find that $210 is a really good sweet spot for the overall controllability intensity that this light provides. So if you're just starting out and you're looking for a basic light that will give you awesome growth and controllability, the Prime HD is where you're at. Now, a couple features about this thing. You can see that it does have a maximum spread of 24 inches by 24 inches. Now, I have tried a similar spread like this on the Lowboy. Now, I did have 4 of these lights over that, so it didn't quite give me the 24 by 24. But I will say that on those outer edges of that 20 to 24 inch, you were getting, or I was getting some lower par readings of 75 to 150, which is definitely lower than what I prefer for my Acropora tanks. Now, if you do stay within the recommended, which is the 18 by 18, a 200, 250, 350 is pretty common for a shallow tank, especially something on a Lowboy. I had no problems growing acros, and it worked out really well. Now, you'll see when we move over to the shallow reef, I'm getting some pretty good par numbers, and that is because I am stacking 4 of these over a tank that essentially could get away with 2 of them, and that's just because I like to focus and channel and have a really consistent spread of par, hence the reason why I went with 4 of them. All right, now we're over here at aquailluminations.com where you set up and program your lights. Now, I do have a separate video on this, and I believe the 30-gallon playlist where I go through the whole process. I figure for time's sake, we'll skip it this time. Now, as you can see, I am controlling all 4 of my lights at one time, which makes it super simple for setting this up. Now, my goal for setting up an overall thought process when it comes to the lighting schedule on this shallow reef is to try to get it as close to the 300 as I can. That's with the overall time and intensity. Now, we're not going to get the higher end par ranges that we're getting on the 300, but we can at least get the same time frame and as close to those par numbers as we can get. Now, as you can see, the tank will turn on or start ramping at 8 a.m. and be at its full intensity at 9 a.m., which, again, if you guys have been following the channel, you know that I really like the AB Plus spectrum, and this is my version of it. We have a full intensity of our UVs, our purples, our blues. Pretty much we're pushing the blue spectrum as much as we can, and I talked about that in a previous video on why you want to push that spectrum, because it really helps promote the growth within the zooxanthellae, or at least helps them produce the energy that is needed to grow. Now, when it comes to the AB Plus spectrum, we do also have to incorporate some green and some reds and some whites, more or less, for us to visually enjoy the tank. So I try to stay pretty low, between 10 to 15% of the greens and the reds, and between 25 to 35% of the cool whites and whites, just to make the tank a little bit more visually appealing. Now, it's going to go from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. at that intensity. There isn't any dips or fluctuations. There's no clouds, there's no storms, there's no lightnings, there's no bull crap, nothing like that. I stay straight, 100% full intensity for 12 hours, and I can hear you guys now going, holy shit, why are you hitting the coral so hard at that intensity? Well, if you guys look at the 300-gallon, that's what I've been doing for the last year and a half, and that tank grows out of the freaking water. So the intensity that I'm using works. Will it work for everybody? Probably not. I can't grow LPS worth crap in there. Soft corals don't like the overall light, but the acros love it, and that's what I'm trying to please within that tank. And the same thing when it comes to this 40 gallons. So we are going from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. at a full percentage, full lighting. Can't get any higher than it can get intensity. Now from there, it's going to ramp back down to 10 p.m., which then it turns off and starts the whole cycle over the next day. So with all of that said, let's go ahead and move over to the par readings. You guys will see on the screen, I will have numbers stick up there so you guys can get a general idea of what the tank is getting overall par. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, right off the bat, when it comes to measuring PAR, which is photosynthetic active radiation, or overall intensity of the lights within your tank, I like to use the Senai Reef. Now, I've talked about this before, and I've shown many videos on it. It's relatively cheap, under 200 bucks. Again, I got mine from Bulk Reef Supply, and it's pretty accurate. I mean, it's not perfect. It does bounce around a little bit, but you get a general idea of what the PAR is within that range. Now, if you want something more accurate, again, you can rent something from Bulk Reef Supply, or you can buy the higher end meters, 3, 4, 5, 6, 700. I've seen meters over $1,000. If you want to spend the money for something you're only going to use once or twice, then go right ahead and do so. But for me, the Senai Reef is perfect. All right, so the first thing I like to do is see what the PAR is directly underneath the light before we go into the water. And you can see that we're at about 1650 to 1700 PAR, which is pretty good. Now, once we go underneath the water, it's going to drop significantly to about 480 to 500 PAR. Now, these lights are exactly 10 inches above the water. They can be lower, but I wanted to keep it the way it is. I can always adjust them down lower if I want more PAR in the tank later on. So at the top of the surface, we have about 488 PAR, and then to the very top of the rock on our left-hand side, we have 270 to 280 PAR. And then for the sake of it, we went down to the bottom of the rock structure. We're at about 200. Now, you guys know that I like to be between 250 to 350 PAR throughout my rock structures to make sure that I have optimal growth for the Acropora. As you guys can see here at the bottom glass, we're at 221, and then as we work our way up, we're staying in between that 200 and 250, upwards of 300 as we get over to the other side of the tank. Now, this is perfect for the amount of light that I'm looking for the Acropora. Again, staying in between that range allows me to put any coral that I want in this tank, and because we're only using Acropora, this is going to be perfect for growth. Now, granted, if I find that I need more light later on, maybe there's shading or the corals are just not growing the way that I want them to, I can always bring them down from 10 inches upward, down to 6 to 5 inches above the water, which will give me even more PAR. Granted, I think that might be too much this early on, being just frags, and with these corals being pulled from the main display from different PAR ranges from 200 to 600 PAR or even higher, I feel that keeping that 250 to 350 is going to be a great start as the tank starts to grow. Okay, now that we have talked about the lighting, let's go ahead and move over to the 300-gallon reef and start cutting some of these acros. Now, when it comes to the thought process and the reason behind cutting some acros over others, really has to come down to a couple things. One, shading. 2, overall growth and room for growth. And 3, popularity on the website. Now, of course, I need to save room for new, better acros that will be going into this 40 gallons, so I have to be limited on what I can cut from this tank. I would love to cut it all and continue to grow all of it in the new tank just so I can have more frags to sell on the website. So the first coral I'm going to cut here is a green slimer staghorn. Now, I really love this coral, and again, it's a big seller on the website. I have 2 different colonies of it in the 300, so adding a 3rd colony in this display is going to be perfect for sales. Now, I don't know the names of many of these acros because a lot of them came in as random corals that I picked up wholesale, put through quarantine, and then eventually added to the tank. So I don't know a lot of the names of these. If you know them, feel free to put them in the description. Now, of course, I like to go ahead and use the bone cutters when it comes to cutting these acros because I went in there before and tried to break it off with my fingers. If you do that, you might crush the polyps. You're not going to get a clean break. And with the rock structures, they are stable, but they're only stable to a certain extent. And if you're cranking on thick acros with your fingers, there's a good chance you can knock the entire rock structure over. And that could be the worst possible thing that would happen to this tank. So my goal is to go through this rock structure by rock structure, and here on the left hand side we're going to be pulling off a total of 8 frags from all the colonies that I have here. Now there's definitely more than 8 different colonies, but most importantly the red planet, which is kind of tucked in there on the right hand side that is getting shaded out from multiple colonies, that's definitely one that I want to sell, as well as this purple one that I've cut at the very top. It grows relatively quickly, but it's getting beat up from the staghorns and the other Meliporas, so I don't really know how much longer that colony is going to last. So what I'm going to do now is, once we have kind of gathered up the 8 frags from this particular rock structure, I'm going to head over to the saw and show you guys how I get them ready to be put into the new tank. Now the purpose of the saw is to simply cut the bottom of the frag so they are flat and easy to glue on the new rock structure. Now you can do this with bone cutters, it works the same way. I just find it's a lot less stressful using a saw because it's quick, easy, and through the skeletal structure, and I'm not there crushing or breaking any part of it. Now if you don't have a saw, it doesn't really matter, and you honestly don't even need to do this if you are okay with just simply pushing them in a hole and on the rock and having them at different angles. But for me, this is just a personal preference, and it seems to work out pretty well. All right, now that we have our first batch of frags, let's go ahead and head over to the 40-gallon and start placing them on the rock structures. Now, when it comes to specific placement, it's going to be determined by the type of coral and how it's currently growing in the main display. My goal is to put the thicker branching staghorns at the top of the rock structure because they do grow out pretty wide and take up a lot of room, but they don't block a lot of light, which allows me to grow those Melipora colonies and other plating acros like the Efflo without worrying about them getting shaded or not getting enough light and ultimately dying and being pretty much useless in this grow out tank. Now, when it comes to buying corals, that's something that I was suggested, I think, through Instagram. I forgot who it is. If you're that person, feel free to let me know in the comment section. But they said, why don't you just take some pictures of the colony in the main display and then put that along the side of the WYSIWYG frag so the person who buys it gets an idea of what it's ultimately going to look like. I thought that was a perfect idea, and it actually helped me determine where I was going to put these frags within this new tank. So shout out to whoever suggested that, and I am currently working on that whole process as we speak. All right, now that we're done with the left rock structure, let's go ahead and move over one and start grabbing some of the more higher demand acroporas like this rainbow millie. I sell a ton of this stuff and it doesn't seem like I can cut it fast enough, so we're gonna go ahead and grab some of that. Also grab a green stag that you can barely see in the back that's getting killed by this rainbow millie, and just basically to save it and have it in another tank. Then I'm going to go up and grab some of the blue and purple staghorn on the far back, which is a really good fast-growing stag. Now, I was thinking about getting the yellow tip blue polyp from Worldwide Corals and putting it in this tank, but granted that the size of the colony that I currently have is already overwhelming this rock structure, I just didn't want to put it in the tank to continue growing it. It sells well enough to justify it, but it's just such a massive colony that I don't really feel like expanding it to another tank. Now, just like our previous frags, I went ahead and cut them on the saw and started placing them within the tank. Now, I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this process from here on out, just because right now, unedited, this video is about 55 minutes long, and I need to get it down under 15 to 20 minutes. So with that said, we're going to fast forward this whole process. You guys get a general idea of where the frags are going. Now, let's go ahead and move over to some of the colonies that I previously removed from the 300 due to shading, fighting, not having enough space to grow. Now, these colonies have been placed on disc, and they've been growing out within the frag tank for the last 6 to 8 months. And we're going to go ahead and cut some frags from them and start putting them in this tank as well. Now, when it comes to cutting these colonies, I will be using the saw for the majority of them. I will be using the bone cutters as well for some of the tightly fit colonies, just because the blade can be a little awkward and start cutting too deep and causing too much damage to the coral. So with that said, I went ahead and probably pulled out 6 or 7 of the colonies that I liked. Some of them I didn't really bother with because they're not something that I want to continue to grow. I just didn't want it to die in the 300, and I'll probably just frag them and sell them throughout the next few months. Now, later on, I did go through and cut the rest of these colonies up into individual frags, but I'll save that video for probably like a Q&A or something so you guys have something to watch other than staring at the 300 during those videos. All right, now that that's done, let's go ahead and jump back into the 300 and cut some more of these colonies. So we're here on the middle right rock structure, which is my favorite of them all. I am going to grab 5 or 6 acro frags from this rock structure. Not all of them are fast growers, but I do enjoy the look of them, and it wouldn't hurt to keep them in another display tank so I can continue to frag and kind of see where these colonies end up going. So I'm going to grab the blue stag, which I only have a little bit of it, surprisingly, because of the green and purple stag, which is on the far back, has kind of taken over the blue one, and it just doesn't get enough light. So that is a number one stag that I got to get out of this tank and start growing it somewhere else, just in the hopes of keeping it a little bit longer and having it for our new tank eventually. So yeah, let's go ahead and add those corals to the 40 gallon. Again, the same process, cutting the bottom of them, putting them in the new tank, and then we'll head over to our fourth and final rock structure, and we should be good for the video. All right, so moving on to our fourth and final rock structure, and the smallest of the four, but the one with the most diversity, with the gorgonians, the sea fans, mushrooms, goniopora, chalices, zoas, dunking corals, acros. I mean, you name it, it's on this rock structure. It's one of my favorite. I say that about all of them. I really love how all of them turned out for their own individual reasons, but this one has two acros on it that I got a long time ago that have been struggling to grow. They came in as random acros. They weren't doing very well. I put them through quarantine, and I put them in the center of this rock structure. I've never fragged them, and I've never sold a piece of them, ever. People have come in and asked for it. I've never done it. I don't even know what they are. But they are beautiful, and one of them is being shaded out by the blue millipora, so it has to be pulled out very quickly. So I went ahead and pulled out what I could of those acros, as well as the blue millie, and I was going to pull out this green one to the bottom left, but it's very brittle, as in the base, it hasn't really attached to the rock structure. Even though it's growing, the base is just not very secure. So I figure instead of breaking the whole colony off, I just leave it alone and let it grow a little bit more. Now, as you guys can probably notice, I did move my chalice off the bottom of the tank and put it on that rock structure, which is complements the other chalices. The acans that I have that are left there, they're doing okay. You guys know that I just can't grow acans in this tank due to the flow and the really high lighting. So yeah, let's go to move over to the display for the last time, add these new acros, and we should be done. So guys, that's about it for the video. I hope you enjoyed it and found it to be somewhat entertaining. Now, there is plenty of room in this tank for several more acros, probably upwards of 20 or 30 more, and we will be filling this tank to the rim. Trust me. It's just going to take some time because I will be sourcing some higher end acros out here locally and probably online. And we also have to put them through a quarantine process, which you guys will see as part of this whole video series in later episodes, if you want to call them that. And yeah, so it's a little bit of a process. I don't bring corals in and then just drop them in my tank. It doesn't work like that. There's definitely a quarantine procedure that will be followed, because all it takes is one mistake and all this disappears overnight. And we don't need that, especially for the channel and for my wallet. So with all that said, I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I will see you later. Peace.